I didn't see the photographer at first. I only saw his hand, fingers curling lightly around the curve of her waist just above the silk-covered line of her hip. Not a guiding touch. Not a friendly pat. A slow, claiming hold, the kind that leaves a print in memory long after the moment is gone. And it was my best friend's hand. Her veil fluttered in the wind from the open barn doors. White roses, wired into the wooden beams, swayed just enough to catch the corner of my vision. The groomsmen were laughing at something off to the side, the bridesmaids straightening dresses, bouquets trembling in the early spring chill, but all I could see was that hand, the tan line where his watch usually sat. The faint scar across his knuckle from the time we'd tried to fix my truck's timing chain in college. Seconds before the wedding photos. Seconds before I would stand in front of the camera, arm around her, smile fixed for a lifetime of framed proof that everything had been perfect. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel, and let us know where you're listening from in the comments. My name is Daniel. I'm 41 years old, and this is what really happened. The first thing you should know is that Ryan and I had been friends since 8th grade. He was the guy who helped me hide my first hangover from my parents. The one who lent me $20 when I couldn't cover my share of the rent in our crappy apartment after college. We'd been through breakups, layoffs, and one late-night trip to the ER after he decided to deep fry a frozen turkey. I trusted him with my life, and I trusted him with her. Her name is Emily. She came into my life 5 years ago in the middle of a dry spell I'd almost convinced myself would never end. She was sharp, funny, and carried herself like she had nothing to prove to anyone. Ryan liked her immediately, or maybe I should say he made sure she liked him immediately. I didn't think much of it back then. He was always good with people, quick with jokes, and confident without being obnoxious. I thought it was just Ryan being Ryan, but that day, my wedding day, the air around them felt different. I shook my head when the photographer waved us into position. "Give me a sec," I muttered, stepping back into the shade of the barn's interior. My tie felt tighter than it had a minute ago. My collar suddenly warm against my neck despite the March wind cutting through the fields outside. The smell of hay and faint dust drifted down from the loft. My cousin's kids were chasing each other between the rows of folding chairs that had been set up for the reception, their sneakers squeaking against the plywood floor. It was the sort of scene I'd always imagined for this day. Simple, homey, nothing too flashy. Except now it felt wrong. When I stepped back toward the open doorway, Ryan had shifted his hand. Not away, just lower, almost brushing the small of her back. Emily didn't flinch, didn't step forward, didn't even glance at him. She just stood there, bouquet in hand, looking out toward the photographer like she was carved from marble. If I hadn't known her so well, I might have missed it. The way her shoulders tensed. The way her knuckles whitened around the stems of the flowers. The click of the camera shutter sounded too loud. "All right, now the groom," the photographer called, cheerful, oblivious. Ryan stepped back smoothly, flashing me that same grin he'd used to talk us out of trouble 100 times before. "Go get your shot, man," he said, clapping me lightly on the arm. I forced my face into something that wouldn't ruin the pictures. Slipped my arm around Emily's waist, feeling the warmth of her through the layers of satin and lace. She smiled, but it was the kind that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Everything okay?" I murmured. She didn't blink as she said, "Smile for the camera, Daniel." The rest of the photos blurred together. Group shots, family combinations, candid laughs that felt like bad acting. But every time Ryan came near her, my chest tightened. It was subtle, too subtle for anyone else to notice, and lingering a beat too long. His body angled toward hers in the crowd, the way his eyes followed her when she moved. By the time we sat down for dinner, my appetite was gone. The roasted chicken on my plate steamed up at me, but all I could taste was the metallic edge of suspicion. Ryan made a toast. He stood, glass in hand, and started with the usual stories. Our high-soul antics, my terrible taste in cars, the night I met Emily. People laughed and I tried to join in, but my jaw ached from clenching it. Then he said it. "She's the best thing that ever happened to him. And if I'm honest, the best thing that ever happened to me too." There was a ripple of eyes around the tables. Emily smiled politely. I gripped my glass so hard I thought it might crack. Later, when the music started and people drifted onto the dance floor, I found him near the bar. "I need to ask you something," I said, low enough that no one else could hear. He leaned in and said, "Sure, man. Anything. Keep your hands off my wife." For a split second his face was unreadable. Then he laughed loud enough to turn a couple of heads. "You serious? Dan, come on. I've known you both for years. That's not the point. He raised his hands in mock surrender, but his eyes were sharp. Relax. It's your wedding day. And just like that, he walked away. I told myself to let it go, that I was overreacting, that maybe he'd had too much to drink, or that the photographer had told him to stand close for the framing. But a seed had been planted, and it was already rooting deep. This set night, after the guests were gone and the barn was quiet, Emily and I stood in the dim light of the doorway, looking out at the empty fields. The stars were cold and bright. I saw his hand on you, I said finally. She didn't answer right away. Then softly, we'll talk about it when we get home. We never did, because 2 weeks later I found the first message. It wasn't like I'd been looking for it. I'm not the kind of man who snoops through his wife's phone without reason. But that morning, Emily's phone buzzed on the kitchen counter while she was in the shower. The screen lit up. Ryan's name. And the preview of the message was enough to pull the air right out of my lungs. Last night was worth the risk. I stared at it. The hum of the refrigerator felt louder, like the whole house was holding its breath. My first instinct was to believe there had to be some other explanation. An inside joke, a misunderstanding, anything. But those words, they didn't leave much room for interpretation. I didn't open it, didn't scroll. I just set the phone back down exactly as it had been and walked to the back porch. The sky was gray, the kind of winter morning that smelled faintly of damp earth and cold metal. I sat there until Emily came out, hair still wet, robe tied loosely around her. "You're up early," she said, sipping coffee. "Yeah." She didn't seem to notice the tightness in my voice. I kept quiet for the rest of the day, and the next, but my mind was a restless machine, replaying every moment from the wedding, every touch, every glance. By the fourth day, I couldn't take it anymore. I lowered my voice when I finally asked, "Is there something you want to tell me?" She looked up from her laptop, eyebrows drawn. "What's that supposed to mean?" I saw a message from Ryan. Her expression barely flickered. "And?" it said. "Last night was worth the risk." She leaned back, crossing her arms. "Daniel, you're reading into things." "Then explain it." "It's not what you think." "That's not an explanation." Her jaw tightened. "We were talking about a poker game at his place. You know how some of his friends aren't exactly careful with their words around me. I told him it might be a bad idea, but I went anyway. That's all." It should have reassured me. It didn't. Because Ryan doesn't even host poker nights anymore, not since his divorce. I let it drop, at least on the surface. But beneath that, something inside me started to shift. A week later, I decided to test the waters. "Ryan texted me about a poker game," I told her over dinner. She froze for half a second, then reached for her wine. "Yeah," said. "You were there." She didn't look at me. "I told you about that." "You didn't." Now her eyes met mine. "Daniel, I think you're starting to imagine things." I didn't answer. I just chewed my steak and listened to the clock tick on the wall. The next day I called Ryan. "Hey man," I started, keeping my tone casual. "Dan, how's married life?" he asked, that easy charm in his voice. "Not bad." "Say, when's the next poker night?" A pause. "Poker night?" "Yeah, Millie mentioned one at your place." He laughed. "Haven't done that in years." "Why?" I let the silence stretch before saying, "No reason." That was the first crack in whatever game they were playing. From then on I watched, not in a jealous, frantic way, but quietly, methodically. I noticed how she smiled at her phone more often, how she started dressing a little sharper on the days she said she was running errands, how Ryan's name started popping up in casual conversation, always with some harmless pretext. I started making notes. Times, dates, places. Not because I was ready to confront them, but because I knew if I was right I'd need more than anger. One Thursday afternoon I left work early, told my boss I wasn't feeling well. My truck's tires hummed against the asphalt as I took the long way home, circling past Ryan's neighborhood. And there it was, her car, parked 2 houses down from his. Like that would make it less obvious. I didn't stop. I didn't even slow down. I just kept driving, heart steady, mind sharper than it had been in weeks. That night I asked her how her day had been. "Busy," she said, peeling potatoes at the counter. "Grocery store, post office, dry cleaner." No mention of Ryan's street. I almost smiled. Because now I knew, without a doubt. Over the next month I built my plan. I didn't shout, I didn't accuse. I didn't even let them know I suspected a thing. I let them think I was blind. That's the advantage of playing the long game. People get comfortable in their lies. I pulled favors from old contacts, including one guy who owed me after I fixed his truck for free years ago. He ran a small private security outfit. Cameras, tracking devices, the works. We met in the back booth of a diner off Route 6. The vinyl seats cracked when I sat down. "What you're asking for," he said, lowering his voice. "You sure you want to see it?" "I don't want to see it," I told him. "I want to own it." The first camera went under her car's dashboard. The second in the corner of our living room, disguised as a smoke detector. The third, well, that one was placed where Ryan parked. It took 3 weeks for the first footage to come in. And when it did, I sat in the dark at my desk, the only light coming from my laptop screen. The grainy black and white image showed Emily stepping out of her car in jeans and a jacket, glancing around before walking up to Ryan's front door. He opened it. She went inside. The door closed. Timestamp 2:17 p.m. She didn't come back out until 5:46. I stared at the footage until the cursor blinked me out of my trance. This was no longer about suspicion. This was about evidence. And once I had enough, I'd make sure both of them regretted thinking they could play me for a fool. 2 weeks later, I got the piece that would change everything. Not a video, not a photo, a recording. And in that recording I heard Ryan say something that burned itself into my brain forever. And in that recording I heard Ryan say something that burned itself into my brain forever. It started with the scrape of a chair against hardwood, a faint clink of glasses, Emily's laugh softer than the one she used with me, like she was holding it close so only he could hear it. Then Ryan's voice. Low, confident, too comfortable. "You should have married me instead." Silence. Not the shocked kind, the kind that means someone's thinking about how to answer. Emily didn't rush to deny it. When she finally spoke, her voice had that same low warmth she'd used on me back when we first met. "You never asked." He laughed, not awkwardly, not apologetically. It was a laugh full of history. "Guess I'm making up for lost time now." I stopped the recording, sat back in my chair. The cursor on the screen pulsed like a slow heartbeat. If there'd been any doubt left, it was gone now. This wasn't some misunderstanding. This wasn't a one-time lapse in judgment. They were building something right under my nose, using my trust as scaffolding. I didn't call him. I didn't storm into the living room and demand an explanation from her. I knew if I blew up now, they'd circle the wagons. She'd delete messages, he'd deny everything, and I'd be left looking like a paranoid husband. No, this had to be handled with precision. The next morning, over coffee, I studied her like a stranger. She was scrolling through her phone, thumb moving in lazy arcs. The steam from her mug curled into the space between us. "I might have to go out of town for work," I said. Her eyes flicked up. "When?" "Next weekend, Friday to Monday." She nodded too quickly. "All right." I knew what that nod meant. An open door. I called my contact that afternoon. "I'm setting the trap," I told him. He didn't need details. Just asked, "You want the real-time feed running?" "Yes, and I want a backup recording off-site." Done. That Friday I kissed her goodbye at the door, suitcase in hand. She stood there in a sweater I'd never seen before, cream-colored, loose at the neck, and for a moment I wondered if Ryan had seen it first. By noon, I was sitting in a cheap motel room 2 towns over, laptop open, the feed from the hidden cameras loading in neat little windows. 2:13 p.m. Her car pulled into the driveway. She came inside, dropped her keys in the bowl. 2:17 p.m. Ryan's truck rolled up. They didn't waste time. Within minutes they were in the living room, drinks in hand, laughing like teenagers. But I wasn't watching for the obvious. I was watching for the part that would break them both in one strike. I got it at 4:09 p.m. Ryan, leaning in, said, "When he's gone for good, we won't have to sneak around." Emily didn't argue, didn't tell him to stop. She just touched his arm and said, "It won't be long." That was the moment I stopped thinking of this as betrayal. This was conspiracy. I let the weekend play out, checked the feed every few hours, adding clips to a separate drive. The hardest part wasn't seeing them together. It was hearing the way she spoke about me when she thought I'd never hear it. "He's too careful," she said once. "He'd never make a scene, that's what makes him easy." Easy. When I came home Monday night, everything looked normal. She asked about my trip. I told her it was fine. I unpacked my suitcase, made dinner, and kissed her goodnight. Inside, I was already dismantling the life she thought she was still living. The first step was legal. I booked a consultation with a lawyer who specialized in divorce cases involving infidelity. I brought the recordings, the photos, The dates, the timestamps. He watched in silence, occasionally scribbling notes. When it was over, he looked at me and said, "You've got them both, no question." We drafted the papers quietly. Property division, asset protection, evidence exhibits. I learned more about marital law in those 3 weeks than I'd ever wanted to know. The second step was social. Ryan had a reputation in our town, the charming, reliable guy everyone liked. He also had a business that relied heavily on that reputation, so I started making careful calls. Not accusations, just little questions to the right people. "Have you noticed Ryan spending a lot of time with Emily?" "I'm sure it's nothing, but someone mentioned seeing them together." It wasn't about planting lies. It was about watering the truth and letting it grow in other people's minds. The third step, that one was personal. I started moving things quietly. My name off certain accounts. Hers left visible. My personal savings shifted into a separate bank under an LLC I'd formed overnight. I canceled joint credit cards under the pretext of streamlining our finances. Every move was quiet, deliberate, and invisible from the outside. Then the night before I planned to file, fate handed me something I couldn't have scripted better. I was pulling into our driveway when I saw Ryan's truck parked a few houses down. Emily was on the porch, arms crossed, looking annoyed. I rolled down the window just in time to hear her say, "You can't just show up like this." He leaned in closer. "I was going to surprise you." Her eyes darted toward my car. "Go." I stepped out slowly, closing the door behind me. "Ryan, didn't expect to see you here." He forced a grin. "Hey man, just in the neighborhood." "Uh-huh." I walked past him, up the steps. "You left your truck running." When I looked back, his face was pale. He left without another word. That night I sat at the kitchen table, divorce papers in one folder and a thumb drive in the other. Emily walked in, hair damp from a shower. "What's that?" "Just some work stuff." She didn't ask again. In the morning she'd have her answer, and so would everyone else. Because my lawyer didn't just file the papers. He scheduled a formal process server to deliver them at Ryan's place. While they were both there, and when that door opened, I made sure there was an audience. And when that door opened, I made sure there was an audience. I'd tipped off 3 people I knew couldn't resist showing up when something was happening on their street. Mrs. Carmichael from across the way, who lived for neighborhood drama. Frank, the retired mailman who still walked his route just to gossip. And Tanya, Ryan's next-door neighbor, who had a habit of filming anything remotely interesting for her social media. The kind of people who spread news faster than any headline. It was a Tuesday morning. Quiet enough that the sound of the delivery truck stopping outside Ryan's place carried down the block. The process server stepped out, not in a suit, but in jeans and a jacket, looking casual but official enough that people noticed. I was parked 2 houses away, far enough to blend in but close enough to see everything. He knocked. The door opened. Ryan stood there in sweatpants and a t-shirt, blinking at the daylight. And then Emily appeared behind him. Her hair was a mess, and she was wearing the same sweatshirt I'd given her for Christmas last year. The one she'd claimed was too sentimental to wear outside the house. The process server smiled politely. "Emily Carter?" She froze. "Yes." He handed her the envelope. "You've been served." There was a beat of silence before she spoke. "Served with what?" He didn't answer, just turned and walked back to his truck. That's the way they do it. No conversation, no drama. The paper speaks for itself. Ryan was already reading over her shoulder when she saw the heading. Petition for dissolution of marriage. She spun around, scanning the street, and that's when she noticed Mrs. Carmichael standing on her porch, coffee mug in hand. Tanya was across the way, phone up, pretending to check the weather app. Frank had stopped mid-walk, leaning on his cane, watching like it was the highlight of his week. Emily's face went pale. Ryan's went red. I could almost hear the gears turning in their heads. They'd been caught. Not just by me, but by the court system, the neighbors, and whoever Tanju's followers happened to be. It was the social equivalent of pulling the fire alarm. I didn't wait for them to come looking for me. I drove off before the shock wore off, heading straight to my lawyer's office. By the time Emily tried calling me 6 missed calls in a row, the filings were already public record. That night I stayed at a hotel, not because I needed the space, but because I wanted her to sit alone in that house, feeling the weight of what she'd just lost. The next few days were a blur of paperwork and quiet victories. My lawyer froze our joint accounts before she could drain them. My separate savings were untouchable. The house, according to the prenup she'd insisted on just to be fair, was mine outright. Ryan, meanwhile, had problems of his own. Word of our divorce and the reason behind it spread faster than I could have hoped. His client list started shrinking. People don't want to do business with a man who can't be trusted around his best friend's wife. On the third day, I got an unexpected call. It was Tanya. "You might want to see this," she said. "Check your email." I opened it to find a link to her latest post, a video taken the morning of the serving. You could clearly see Emily in the doorway, Ryan behind her, both of them caught in that moment of pure exposure. Tanya's caption was brutal. Neighborhood soap opera starring the cheater and the homewrecker. The comments were worse. Emily called me that night. I let it go to voicemail. "Daniel, we need to talk. Please. This isn't how it looks." I almost laughed at that. She'd used the same line when I found that first message. Back then, I might have been willing to believe her. Now I had a plan for the final act. I waited until the following Saturday. The weather was clear, the kind of early spring day when everyone seemed to be outside working on their lawns. I called Ryan. "Hey," I said flatly. "We need to meet. My place. Noon." He hesitated. "Is this about—" "Yes." By noon I was standing in my driveway, folder in hand. Emily's car pulled up first. She got out slowly, like she wasn't sure whether to approach. Ryan arrived a few minutes later, stepping out with that same casual arrogance he'd worn since we were kids. "What's this about?" he asked. I opened the folder, pulled out a stack of papers and a USB drive. "This," I said, "is everything you've done. Every text, every visit, every word you thought I'd never hear." Ryan's smirk faltered. Emily's mouth tightened. "You think you can just blow up my life?" Ryan asked. I met his eyes. "You blew up your own. I'm just making sure the pieces don't hit me on the way down." Emily stepped forward. "Daniel, we can fix this." "No," I cut in. "We can't. And I don't want to." I handed her the divorce papers again, just so she could feel their weight. Handed him the US. "What's this?" he asked. "Your copy," I said, "so you'll remember exactly how you lost." They didn't argue, they didn't apologize. They just stood there, realizing the one thing they'd never counted for, that I wasn't going to rage or beg or fight to keep something that wasn't worth keeping. And that was the real hit. But I wasn't finished. Because the USB I gave Ryan wasn't the only copy. There was another labeled for delivery to his ex-wife. And one for his biggest client. And one for the community board he'd just been nominated to join. By Monday, the ripple effects were everywhere. His client pulled their contract. His ex filed to reopen custody negotiations, citing character concerns. The community board vote? Canceled. Emily, meanwhile, moved out quietly. No big scene, just gone one afternoon. Her side of the closet empty. She left the sweatshirt behind. I tossed it in the trash. For weeks I barely saw either of them, but the last time I did it was in the grocery store. They were together walking down the frozen foods aisle, heads low like they hoped no one would notice. People noticed. And as I passed them, cart rolling slow, I didn't say a word. I just let the silence do the talking. But the real silence, the one they didn't see coming, was still on its way. Because while they were busy trying to survive the public fallout, I'd been working on something else, something bigger, and it had Ryan's name written all over it. See, there's one thing Ryan always underestimated about me. I remember everything. Every favor I've done, every debt someone owes me, every little piece of information that could be useful someday. And in Ryan's case, I remembered exactly how he'd landed his biggest contract. It wasn't luck, it wasn't pure skill. It was a shortcut, one that wasn't exactly above board. Years ago, I'd been in his office when a file crossed his desk from a competitor. Confidential numbers. Inside pricing sheets. I'd asked him where he got it, and he'd brushed me off with a laugh, but I knew. And I'd kept that knowledge tucked away, just in case. Now was the case. Through a mutual contact, someone who owed me after I'd helped him dodge a nasty tax penalty, I got a clean, detailed copy of those documents. Enough to show that Ryan's big break was built on stolen information. It was perfect, not fabricated, not a smear campaign. Just the truth, wrapped in a neat, undeniable package. I sent it to 3 places at once. The company he'd stolen from, his current biggest client, the ethics board of his professional association. No signature, no return address. By the following week, the storm hit. The company he'd stolen from filed a formal complaint. His biggest client put their account on hold, pending review of contractual integrity. and the ethics board opened an investigation that could strip him of his license for good. The cherry on top. Local business news picked it up. Headline: Prominent contractor under investigation for ethics violations. The photo they used was from a Chamber of Commerce mixer. Him smiling wide with Emily on his arm. I didn't have to lift another finger. Ryan's phone calls stopped. Emily's too. Even their friends went quiet. In a small town you don't survive that kind of public rot. One evening, about a month later, I was closing up my workshop when I heard footsteps in the gravel outside. Ryan. He looked thinner. Not in a healthy way. More like the weight had been scraped off him from the inside. "You did this?" he said, voice low but steady. I leaned against the doorframe. "You did this, Ryan?" I just made sure people saw it. His jaw worked like he wanted to say more, but in the end he just turned and walked away. I never saw him again. As for Emily, I heard she moved 2 states over. No word on whether they stayed together. Part of me thinks they did, at least for a while. Misery loves company, and they'd built theirs together. I didn't follow up, didn't care. The house is quiet now. My life is quieter too. But it's a good kind of quiet, the kind that doesn't leave you wondering what's happening behind your back. Sometimes I walk past the old wedding photo that's still boxed up in the garage. I never threw it out. Not because I miss it, but because it reminds me of the moment I learned something important. Trust is like glass. Once it's cracked, you can pretend it's still whole, but you'll always see the fracture. And when I think about Ryan's hand on her waist in that barn doorway, seconds before the wedding photos, I don't feel anger anymore. I just feel the satisfaction of knowing they'll never forget how it felt when the camera finally turned on them. If this story struck a chord, hit like, subscribe, and tell me what you think in the comments.